Benvenuti. Welcome, everyone, to another one of my virtual experiences talks. My name is Anne Robichaud. I've been an authorized Umbrian tour guide for many years here in Umbria, living just outside the medieval gem of Assisi. I'm generally sharing the wonders of Umbria as a guide, live with people as we walk the streets of the beautiful medieval hill towns of Umbria. Due to the present circumstances, that isn't possible. So I am now sharing the wonders of Italy, Umbria in particular, through my talks. Certainly, history has vividly recorded the atrocities of the concentration camps in Germany and so forth, and the persecution of the Jewish people, political people as well, gypsies, some Catholics, Catholic political prisoners, and so forth. But let us remember that the widespread persecution of the Jews in particular extended far beyond the German homeland. And here in Assisi, there was an extraordinary, powerful effort of collaboration, of cooperation, as priests and printers and a famous bicyclist from Tuscany, Bartali, who you can see in the upper left-hand corner, collaborated to save the Jewish refugees in Assisi, probably over 300. We'll meet Graziella Viterbi, you see her in the upper right-hand corner. We'll meet the printer below her who falsified the documents so she was able to hide here, Donaldo Brunachi on the left, and so forth. We're also going to learn about the places where they were hidden. And we are also going to conclude our discussion by realizing that beautiful Assisi, as you see it today, is still to be seen, to be treasured, and to be visited thanks to Colonel Valentin Mueller, the German commander of the Wehrmacht in Assisi, 1943 to 1944, a devout Catholic who attended Mass every morning at the tomb of St. Francis. You can see the tomb of St. Francis right up here in the left-hand corner. He received communion every morning. When he went in, he had to leave his gun with a guard, and he picked it up when he went back to his hotel. But my discussion tonight will start with one of the first people that I met in Assisi, and he was instrumental in the efforts to save the Jewish refugees here, Donaldo Brunachi. I met Donaldo as of fall of 1975 or 1976. He was one of the first persons that I met here in Assisi, and for this reason. In order to earn a living, we were living on the land outside of Assisi. Some of you may have viewed my presentation, Umbrian Life, Rural Life Revisited, and know that we farmed for many years. We kind of started with nothing, and I started teaching English as a way to bring some support to the family. Pino went to work as a stonemason. He'd been a chemical analyst and so forth. Well, when I had my first 8 students, I didn't know where to teach them. And so one morning I went to a travel agent near the Basilica, Dr. Mancini, who was very adept and knew everything about the situations in Assisi. And I asked him if he knew where I could possibly rent a small space to teach these 8 students. He said, Anna, un minuto. He picked up the telephone, had a brief chat. He said, grazie, arrivederci, hung up, and he said, Donaldo Brunachi is waiting for you. Look on this Assisi map, how to find him. He showed me the way up to the retreat house that Donaldo was running, Casa Papa Giovanni, named after Pope John the 23rd. And Donaldo received me. He was the canon of the Cathedral of San Ruffino. The canon is a priest who administers a cathedral, and a canon is generally an appointment. It is always actually an appointment by the bishop. And he was the canon of the Cathedral of San Ruffino. Well, that day, immediately he said, here in Casa Papa Giovanni, you can certainly use one of our rooms for your students. He gave me a room to teach English, no rent asked. Not only that, but when our son Keegan was born in 1980, this would be about 5 years later, Donaldo baptized him here in the Cathedral of San Ruffino. A friend recently reminded me that he also gave a nice sermon tracing the Celtic roots of Keegan's name. That's like Donaldo, because he was a very, very erudite, intellectual gentleman. When it was necessary to have the baptismal lunch, you usually invite 20 to 30 friends for confirmations, communions, baptism, more for matrimonies. You know that in Italy, everything is celebrated with a feast. We certainly couldn't afford to have a glorious lunch in a restaurant or hotel. And Donaldo said, you can have it right here in Casa Papa Giovanni. And this was the dining room ceiling over us as we all dined in this 17th century gorgeous palace, Palazzo Locatelli, a noble palace, which then became diocesan and was used as a retreat house, which Donaldo directed, called Casa Papa Giovanni. Look at those marvelous grotesque paintings on the ceiling. We won't go into grotesque now. Some of you will be familiar with this terminology if you were able to join in on my talk, Assisi's medieval street art, from the sacred to the grotesque. And briefly, grotesque has the word grotto in it, because in the 15th century, when they discovered what they thought was a painted grotto, painters working in Rome on commissions were thrilled. Among them, the young Raphael, Pinturicchio. We saw his work in my talk on Spello. Signorelli's grotesque, we saw in my talk on Orvieto. The painters were thrilled with these grotto-like paintings, except they weren't in a grotto. What they were seeing was the golden house of the Roman Emperor Nero of the 1st century AD, which had been covered over with centuries of earth. So the painted grotto gives us the terminology for this lovely, whimsical, decorative painting, grotesque. Donaldo took care of us in providing this wonderful banquet lunch for Keegan's baptism, providing me with a locale to teach English. In the summers, I worked at Casa Papa Giovanni until I could find more students, and I helped clean the bedrooms and worked in the kitchen with the 2 wonderful sisters who did everything there, Sor Ave and Sor Severina. He took care not only of us, but of 300 Jewish refugees hidden here in Assisi at the request of the bishop. He was the assistant to the bishop. One of them was Graziella Viterbi. Here she is with Donaldo, many years after the World War II events. And behind them are the books of the bookstore, which is now part of the Casa Papa Giovanni building. They still offer retreats here, and they have a bookstore as well. Graziella was hidden here with her family. They were from Viterbo. And this is Donaldo at the time of the war. He was about 30 years old here. He's walking through the back streets of Assisi. And they came from Viterbo. I'll be talking about them. And were hidden in Assisi thanks to Donaldo. Donaldo was interviewed by Steven Spielberg, survivors of the Show of Visual History Foundation in Milan. And at that time, the Spielberg crew had interviewed 400 people who had assisted in providing shelter to Jewish refugees. And of the 400 people interviewed in Italy, they decided to record the interviews of 4 people, 3 others beside Donaldo Brunachi. They interviewed for this study 50,000 people in 57 countries. Donaldo received another award in 2003 from the president then of Italy, Carlo Azeglio Ciampi. He received the Gran Croce dell'Ordine al Merito della Repubblica, the Great Cross of the Order of Merit of the Republic, obviously of Italy. This is the highest award given to a civilian who has served his country. Donaldo told me that when the letter came telling him that he was invited to Rome to receive this in the Quirinale Palace, he thought it was all a joke. He was honored at Yad Vashem. The word in Hebrew, the terminology signifies a memorial and a name. The World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Israel, He was awarded recognition there in 1977. Yad Vashem had been established in Israel in 1953. And by 1961, it was recognizing the righteous among the nations. And one of those was Donaldo Brunachi. In Yad Vashem, 1977, this photo, he's planting a tree. At the time, the righteous were given a tree to plant. He was given a carob tree, and here he's planting his tree. But there is no longer the tree planting ceremony because the tradition has been discontinued due to lack of space. As of January 2020, 27,000 men and women from 51 countries had been recognized at Yad Vashem, where more than 10,000 authenticated rescue stories have been gathered. Well, for many years in my work as a tour guide, a highlight of small private tour was a stop at the bookstore in Casa Papa Giovanni to chat with Donaldo Brunachi. You can see this photo was taken in 2002. And I would make a stop there if people were interested in meeting him. People were really enthralled with talking to him, hearing the various stories of rescue. Another place that we would stop would be, here's Donaldo in the print shop. It was right near the Basilica of Sinclair, the print shop where Luigi and Trento Brizzi, father and son, printed the false documents that hid the identity of the Jewish refugees in Assisi. And so stops at Casa Papa Giovanni and stops at the Brizzi print shop were always highlights of a tour. Each encounter with Donaldo was unique and each was moving. I took this picture during one of our meetings. I was with a group of maybe 6 people who very much wanted to talk to him. And I remember some of the questions and I recorded them. This was a question which I heard a lot with interviews with Donaldo. This was from a Jewish tour guest. Why, Donaldo, did you take the risk to help our people? His answer always was, in some way, these words, because my bishop asked me to do so. And as Christians, our task is to extend assistance to those who need it. And here are examples of a few other exchanges. Donaldo, did the Jewish children attend school here in Assisi during the time they were hidden here in 1943 and 1944? Donaldo answered, generally, we felt it better not to run that risk, but some of the children, once they had identity cards, were able to attend the public school in Assisi. Most, however, studied at home. They studied on their own, and I myself tutored some of the older students from Northern Italy in Greek and Latin so that they'd be ready to take their state exams. The students hidden in Assisi had a lot to study. They had to learn about the area where they once lived. You see, we provided them with false ID cards and false ration cards. We located their place of residency in a city south of Rome so that part of Italy had been liberated by the Allies. So we knew that a suspicious German or Italian fascist soldier trying to check the documents would hit a dead end. And then Donaldo said, and they had much to learn. For example, Graziella Viterbi, who was from Padua, their family's name was changed to Vitelli, and they were assigned the city of Lecce in Puglia in southern Italy for their place of provenance. And Donaldo said, those young people had to learn every detail about local habits, local personalities, and even the local gossip of the town they were supposed to be from. He was asked, did anyone die during the year that the Jews were hidden in Assisi? He said, yes. A woman died of natural causes. Her name was Clara Weiss. She was an Austrian from Vienna, an Austrian woman, a Jewish woman from Vienna. She was ill with cardiac problems. He said he visited her the day before her death, and I think he prayed for her and with her. Friends of hers came in the night and said, what shall we do? And he said, not to worry. He purchased the funeral plot. And the funeral procession in the morning went out the Porta San Giacomo gate. This is one of the 8th, 13th century gates of Assisi. And going out here, you head onto the road right to the cemetery. And guess what? As they went out the gate, there were German soldiers there. They clicked their boots together and saluted the funeral procession, obviously not knowing that it was a Jewish woman being carried to the Assisi cemetery. And she was buried in a plot that Donaldo had purchased. And this is the cemetery plot. Her name, I said, was Clara Weiss, but she was buried by Donaldo under the name Bianca Bianchi. Bianchi and Bianca both mean white, as Weiss did. And they organized the funeral procession for late afternoon, so that when they got to the cemetery, and it was November of 1943, Donaldo said to the custodian of the cemetery, "Oh, it's cold and it's dark, and we've already said the prayers for her at San Quirico, where she was staying as a guest in the guest house. So we'll just quickly bury her." And this is the plaque. Her son came to Assisi in the 1950s. He was living in Brazil. And this is the plaque now on her grave with the Star of David. And you can see the stones left by many Jewish visitors, and not only Jewish visitors. I am grateful for input at our question period from any Jewish friends listening to this talk, because I'm going to share information that I've gleaned as best I can through research. But please understand, I went to a Dominican grade school, Sisters of the Blessed Virgin Mary High School, and a Jesuit university. And so my knowledge of many of the traditions of Jewish culture may not be exact. I did do some research on why stones are left on grave sites, and found some interesting explanations. One, that they're a sign of remembrance, a symbol of memory of the person. Another, that they're there so that the dead souls do not leave the grave, but the stones keep them down. Another explanation, and these were all on different sites of Jewish culture and Jewish history, was they were put on graves when people were first buried in shrouds, so that stones would indicate to people where the burial site was. Mrs. Weiss's son had this beautiful inscription written on her tombstone. Here in Assisi, she found loving hospitality during the Nazi persecution, taking her last breath peacefully. And not far from Mrs. Weiss's tomb is Donaldo Brunachi's grave. He died in 2007. And when I was visiting his grave recently, one of his relatives was there, Franco. And you can tell he's not Jewish. And I'll tell you why. He's putting the stone on the cross of Donaldo's grave with his right hand. The stones should be put with the left hand on the graves, so I read. And this is Donaldo Brunachi's burial plot. You can see here he died in 2007. You can see stones left by many visitors, leave stones. Franco told me there are often many, many stones on his grave. And this is the dedication to him. Canonico, he was the canon of the Cathedral of San Ruffino. Donaldo Brunachi, priest of great culture and profound spirituality, meritorious for the help given to politically persecuted people, in particular the Jews during the war, 1940 to 1945, has been counted among the righteous by the state of Israel. And about 2 years ago, for the Day of Memory, January 27th, the Day of Memory, they dedicated a terrace looking over the valley. It was foggy that day, to Donaldo Brunachi. There's our mayor, Stefania Proietti, in her sash. This is the bishop. This woman, Daniela, takes care of all the affairs that have to do with Casa Papa Giovanni these days. And this is the beautiful little terrace looking out at the Basilica of Sinclair. As you look at it, right up behind you would be the Cathedral of San Ruffino. And of course, he was canon of the Cathedral of San Ruffino. His funeral was there in 2007. I wouldn't have missed that funeral. The church was packed. The funeral mass was presided by the bishop and 10 other clerics, as well as Gustavo Reichenbach, representing the Jewish community of Perugia, and who recited Kaddish. And that is the only time that the morning prayer, the Hebrew morning prayer, has been recited in that cathedral that was built in the 12th century. And it's probably the only time it was recited, the Kaddish. And the cathedral choir, it was very beautiful, sang the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd." And I thought, how befitting is that for Donaldo's funeral? He had been the good shepherd to so many Jews hidden here in World War II, along with the bishop, along with Padre Ruffino that we'll talk about, along with the two printers. And in 1975, he had been a good shepherd to us too. And I was talking to Professor Reichenbach outside after the mass. And as we talked, a wry reporter came up to us, saw us talking, and he interviewed us. And we were on national television that night. And he asked us what we thought about Donaldo's generous assistance during the war, and what personal relationship we had with him. And I had talked about his generosity with our family when we first came to Assisi, and how much visits with him meant to my tour guests when I was doing guided tours, especially if some of my tour guests were children of Holocaust survivors. In this group, I think the couple on the left were very, very touched. We're visiting Donaldo at Casa Papa Giovanni. This is 2007. This is the year of his death. This is some months before. And one of the women in that tour, I don't know which one looking at this, said this, and I'd like to read it. She wrote, "A Jewish family accompanying us on the tour brought tears to our eyes as they expressed their heartfelt thanks and appreciation to Father Brunachi. Of all the places we went and of all the things we saw, our seeing and hearing him was an absolute highlight for me. Thank you, Anne, so much for this wonderful tour of Assisi. When I think of Assisi, I now think of Donaldo, and I always will. I think he was a person at peace with himself, and that was so reflected in his demeanor and his humility. You know, Anne, it takes a certain kind of person to create a strong sense of serious contemplation in the very middle, to create a strong sense of serious contemplation in the very middle of a wondrous trip to Italy." She's talking about her trip. And she wrote, "There was not a dry eye in our group, and all of us agree that he gave us something. I don't know what in an exact sense it was, but he gave us something special. I think maybe a sense of doing the best we can in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. His serenity, humility, and the very visible at peace with himself composure was so evident. And Assisi has lost a great man." The Museo della Memoria was created in Assisi some years ago, and there's a whole section there dedicated to Donaldo Brunacci. When you're next in Assisi, you'll want to go to the Museo della Memoria 1943 to 1944. There's a whole section in this museum dedicated to Jewish refugees who were hidden here, among them Graziella Viterbi. There she is meeting Pope Francis on his Assisi visit in 2013. And she was meeting him in the Sala della Spoliazione, which is the room of the derobing, where Francis stripped himself naked before the bishop, renouncing his earthly inheritance, and where the Bishop of Assisi had received her family in 1943. And she was saying to him, "Grazie di tutto quello che voi della Chiesa avete fatto per noi." Thank you, all of you of the church, for all you did for us. And he answered her back, "My thanks go out to you. Thank you so much for what you said, and please pray for me," he said. And I'm sure she had that twinkle in her eye. She always did. That's our Graziella Viterbi. When she first came to Assisi, she and her family stayed for a month and a half at the Hotel Sole. They came from Padua, September 8th, 1943, Armistice Day. Italy is not occupied by the German troops. Her family was enjoying a summer vacation, a brief one, in the region of Emilia-Romagna. And while they were there, they heard about the entry of the Germans into the city of Padua, and they knew they couldn't go back. And someone at the hotel had mentioned that he'd heard that Assisi was quite a safe place for Jewish people, also because they have a fascist mayor who's a good man. That's Arnaldo Fortini, and he was. He was the founder of a whole organization of Franciscan studies, extremely erudite. He hid things for the Viterbis and other people. He would be another talk completely, Arnaldo Fortini, the mayor during the war years. And so they were there for about a month and a half. And Graziella also said that her father wanted to come to Assisi because he thought they would be safe in the town of San Francesco. And there is this maiolica tile between 2-bedroom windows in the second floor. And I wonder if Professor Viterbi sometimes looked at it when they walked outside the hotel. Graziella said he had 3 books near his bed. One was the Bible, one was the autobiography of a yogi, and the other was the Fioretti, the delightful little stories of the life of St. Francis. So they were there about a month and a half, and then they met with the bishop, Monsignor Placido Nicolini, and he found them lodgings, and they later moved into a rental apartment. Placido Nicolini's residence was Palazzo del Vescovado, and Graziella has very warm memories of this bishop. She describes him in this way: he was a loving man, like a boy in his enthusiasm, with a wonderful heart. And when they first went there, and they didn't know where they were going to go before they found the rental apartment, and they were uncertain about the best place to stay, the bishop told her father that it was difficulty finding rooms for everybody because the population of Assisi was 5,000 then, but there were about 5,000 displaced persons fleeing war-damaged homes in Assisi. And then there were the 300 Jewish refugees as well. And he says, we have a difficult problem with lodgings. And he says, there's nothing I can do here, but what I can do is this: I'll sleep in my office and your family can have my bedroom. That was Bishop Nicolini. They didn't need to stay there, but that was his offer. Another religious person, another cleric who helped the Jewish refugees, was Padre Ruffino Nikachi. He also is remembered as a righteous Gentile at Yad Vashem, as is the bishop. Because Donaldo, when he was recognized in 1977, he wrote that he would accept the honor only if the Bishop of Assisi was to be honored too, because he was working at the request of the Bishop of Assisi for the Jewish refugees. Monsignor Placido Nicolini had already died. You can see that he died in 1973, but the Bishop of Assisi in 1977, that was Dino Tomasini, went with Donaldo to Yad Vashem to receive the recognition also for Monsignor Placido Nicolini. Padre Ruffino Nikachi, a Franciscan staying at the Church of San Damiano, was also recognized. The Church of San Damiano is outside the walls. It is a 12th century church. And you can see on the right, this request for prayer as you can go in, and carved on the rock here is a line from the Canticle of the Creatures, praise be the Lord for brother son of Francis, because when he was ill in his later life, he died at the age of 44 in the mid 13th century, early 13th century, 1226. He was cared for by the Poor Clares here. And he launches into this spontaneous prayer for the praise of all of creation, the Canticle of the Creatures at San Damiano. Years prior, when praying before the crucifix of San Damiano, Francis, after returning from the war with Perugia, as a young man, decided he was going to leave behind himself the life of the wealthy cloth merchant's son to live a spirit of poverty. He was praying before the crucifix of San Damiano, In 1205, this is depicted in a late 13th century fresco attributed to the school of Giotto in the Basilica of St. Francis. And he said to the cross, or to the Lord, "What would you like me to do?" And the response was, "Rebuild my church." This is the cross of San Damiano. Those of you who visited Assisi recently or will be visiting will know or should know that it is now over the altar in the Basilica of St. Clare, because when the Clares moved from San Damiano inside the city walls into the basilica built for them, the Basilica of St. Clare in the mid-13th century, the sisters brought the cross. So now at San Damiano, there is over the altar a copy of the cross. And this is a restoration of the church in which Francis was praying, and the cross, it said, had spoken to him. I found this old photo of San Damiano, and I quite like it because I would suspect that it's probably what it looked like roughly during the war years. Now, as mentioned, and Graziella was telling me too, Donaldo had told me, these young people hidden in Assisi, whether they were hidden by Padre Ruffino Nikachi, whether by the bishop, whether by Donaldo, these young people, one of the first tasks that they had to take on was to learn about their new place of residence. For the Viterbis, that was to be Lecce, in the heel of the boot, Puglia. And Graziella read daily, studied in the Assisi library about Lecce. And these are her notes telling you, go out here, go across from the cathedral, continue down this street, go here, go left, and you come out here. She had to be prepared to take you on a walk through Lecce if she was taken in and questioned. And she helped her younger sister, Miriam, learn about Lecce as well. They'd talk about it at night. They soon had their false identity documents, and with their false ID documents, that's when they could leave the Hotel Sole and go to a rental apartment. And they were given the surname of Vitelli. You can see it right here. Rather than Viterbi, Vitelli. Viterbi is a clearly Jewish surname. The Jewish surnames often incorporate the name of a city, Ferrara, and so forth. And Vitelli becomes their new surname. And this was her identity card, Graziella's. And Donaldo told me that generally when they gave the Jewish people a new place of residence and a new surname, their surname had to be very close to their former name, at least the first syllable the same. Viterbo, Vitelli. So if they were questioned, they had that second to think the false name. That's her false identity card. This is her father. He was Emilio Viterbi, a very respected chemistry professor at the University of Padua, the first professor ever in Europe to teach the chemistry of photography or photographic chemistry, whatever it is, the association of photography with chemistry. And he lost his job with the racial laws of 1938. His wife was Margherita Viterbi, and she became Maria Rita Vitelli. Graziella once told me about the racial laws. She said, the racial laws came in 1938. I was young then. And my first thought was, oh, I don't have to go to school. And then I realized the injustice of the racial laws. And what she said was, and I wish I could find it for you, the exact quote. She said, and then I realized the injustice of it. So I thought, they don't want us, I don't want them. She said, that was my reaction of strong Jewish pride. This is her sister's ration card, her little sister, Miriam Viterbi. And this is her ration card to buy bread and general foodstuffs from March to June of 1944. This is for young people, a ration card between the ages of 9 and of 18. Actually, she probably didn't have to use it much because Assisi was liberated on June 17th of 1944. After they left the Hotel Sole, they found a lovely apartment in Via Borgo Aretino with views like this, looking out at the Basilica of St. Clair. I thank Andrea Angelucci, a great Assisi photographer, for use of this photo. And they rented that apartment for about, many, many years. I think over probably 50 years. And Graziella, especially after her husband died, would come often back to Assisi. Right after the earthquake of 1997, the apartment with which she continued to enjoy stays in Assisi frequently was taken back and had to have work done on it. And at that time, therefore, Graziella started to stay at the Hotel Belvedere, a small Assisi hotel, right near the place that the family had rented, because she said she needed to see that kind of view. And sometimes she'd be walking on the streets of Assisi and I'd stop to see her, and we'd stop to chat. This was a tour group and everybody was delighted to meet Graziella Viterbi. Not only that, but Graziella Viterbi had been hidden for a month and a half. They stayed at the Hotel Sole when they arrived through Assisi. Irony of ironies, I directed for many years the elder hostel programs of Assisi. And the people stayed at the Hotel Sole. And Graziella would come and speak to our groups. As soon as I met her, I'd ask her to come in every time I had a group. And we just would take an hour. And she spoke quite good English. And I would just say, please, anybody that you wish, ask Graziella any questions you wish. And I learned so much because every time we had an encounter with Graziella, the questions were different. And that day after she left us, there she was going down the street with her cane, at this point, indomitable, courageous Graziella Viterbi. She loved her Assisi and her son, Emanuele, who's an actor in Rome. She has two sons. Benedetto is a rabbi in Rome. Emanuele is an actor. He told me recently, I said, Emanuele, tell me something about your mother's love for Assisi. And he said, well, Anna, he said, Assisi was her home. More than Rome. She lived in Padua until she was 17, then in Assisi a couple of years, and then for over 70 years in Rome. But her heart was always in Assisi. Graziella always said to me, she said this to me once, but she repeated it again and again, even, in different ways, Assisi has always given me a sense of security. Monsignor Placido Nicolini was one of the first people that Graziella met in Assisi after their stay at the Hotel Sole. And she has wonderful memories of the Bishop Nicolini. And her description of him was this: Monsignor Nicolini was a most special person, a man of extraordinary sweetness, at least in his rapport with my family. He was the incarnation of innocence. Just imagine that he himself kept all of the identity cards of all of us refugees. He hid them in a niche in the wall just above his desk, covered by a small curtain. If one day, God save us, the Germans had decided to search there, we were all fried. Note, fried is the Italian expression for we were all cooked. How did the bishop feel about his role, I asked her. Graziella said he was most tranquil, even though he always had small details to handle and great urgent matters to take care of. When he went to visit him, he was calm. He always had for us ready a bottle of olive oil or maybe panini. He was always molto familiare, which means natural, welcoming, at ease. And he was also Trentino. He was from Trentino in northern Italy. And Graziella said, and so he could talk with my parents in dialect, because the Viterbi dialect of Padua up in the Veneto was quite simple and quite similar. And she said that united us very, very much. She also remembers fondly her reunion with the bishop some years later when he returned to Assisi. He retired to his hometown in Trento. I believe it was in 1966. He's no longer the Bishop of Assisi. He too was recognized as righteous among the nations, and this recognition again in 1977. Here we have the Palazzo Vescovado, where he lived and where he received the Jewish refugees. And this was the place. This is a restored 16th, 17th century building of the Palazzo Vescovado, in front of which Francis had renounced his earthly inheritance in 1206, throwing his clothes back at his father. And you can see right here, the Bishop of Assisi, it said, covered up Francis's nakedness. This is a plaque in bronze. This is the fresco of the late 13th century, attributed to the school of Giotto in the upper Basilica of St. Francis, where Francis has stripped himself naked before his father in front of the bishop's palace. This is what it looked like in the 13th century. You can see proclamations could be made from here. The bishop covers up his nakedness, looks at his clerics as if to say, now what do I do with this kid? The bishop is dressed in reds and blues, the colors of nobility. Francis's father is in gold, another color of nobility. He was a very erudite, a citizen of Assisi, a wealthy cloth merchant. The bishop did not want trouble with Pietro Bernardoni. He's being held back probably by Francis's brother Angelo, who could have been saying, Papa, aspetta un minuto. Francis has just said, Pietro Bernardoni, you are no longer my father. Henceforth, I will only say, our Father who art in heaven. Look at, he's not looking at his father. He's looking at God the Father in heaven. The bishop then, Bishop Guido, 13th century, Bishop Niccolini, 19th century, so instrumental in saving the Jewish refugees. And not only that, in 1937, he wrote hundreds of letters to the bishops throughout Italy and the Holy See, asking the intercession of San Francesco for the care and well-being of all the nation as its patron saint. And on April 6th, that was on April 6th in 1937. In 1938, Mussolini's racial laws were put into effect. In June of 1939, Pope Pius XII declared Francis of Assisi and Catherine of Siena patron saints of Italy. And many years later, a Jewish refugee, including Graziella Viterbi's father, told the bishop when asked, why did you come here? We came because we felt safe in the town of Francis. This is the bishop, probably the years just before he left and retired in his own town near Trento in northern Italy. But Graziella Viterbi told me that he came back at one point and stayed in a Benedictine convent, this one here that we see on the right. That is the convent of the Benedictines called San Giuseppe. He, after all, was a Benedictine. And Donaldo said, you know, Benedictines, their motto is ora et labora, work and prayer, and he knew how to work. Many of the Jewish refugees gave him their Torahs, family documents, jewels, their identity cards, and he hid them in the lower level of the bishop's palace. He and Donaldo would go down together, and Donaldo said he followed the motto ora et labora. He was quite a worker. He was an excellent stonemason. And they would break into the walls. Donaldo would hold the candle, and the bishop would break down the wall, put in the document, seal the wall. And if the bishop was a bit tired, they'd switch. The bishop would hold the candle, and Donaldo would become the stonemason. And this is the place, the Monastery di San Giuseppe, where the bishop stayed many years after he had left for northern Italy. He came back for a brief visit. He met with the Viterbis. And Graziella and her family came to see him from Rome, and she told a beautiful story. She said, you know, he came back to visit, and he asked about my mother, who was not very well. And he said, oh, povera Margherita, quanto mi dispiace, poor dear Margaret. And Graziella said, as if she was part of his family. This is the Benedictine Convent, and right down there is the oldest church in Assisi. You can see the bell tower of the Benedictine Church, San Pietro, 11th century. The bishop is buried in Assisi, the Cathedral of San Ruffino. And no, excuse me, he's buried in northern Italy in the town where he died, but there is a monument to him in the Cathedral of San Ruffino. And this relief was done by Enrico Manfrini to Bishop Placido Niccolini, the Bishop of Assisi. From November of 1928, he was bishop until 1973. It's a nice depiction of him taking children and adults under his cloak. On his right is Francis, on his left is probably San Ruffino, patron saint of Assisi, because this is the Cathedral of San Ruffino. Not far from this monastery of San Giuseppe, kind of right around the corner, is another convent, also called Monastero. Let us remember that in Italian, monastero is residence of the nuns and convento is residence of the friars. Because in a monastero live the monache, the nuns. The Monastery of San Quirico was one of the places where they hid many, many Jewish refugees in World War II, also Italian political prisoners. And the monastery was built in the 15th century. And it is of the Poor Clares, called Clarisse. And over the door is a fresco depicting the Blessed Virgin with Saint Anna, both in the royal colors of blue, the Virgin, blue and red, blue for the Virgin and red for Saint Anna. And this image is called Madonna del Latte. You can see the breast there of the Madonna. It's an unusual image. It's a depiction of the Virgin nursing the Christ child. It's unusual in this case, particularly because it's over the door of a convent, but it could have a direct association with the Church of San Quirico, with this convent of San Quirico, because the Madonna del Latte could actually be a reference to the mother house of the Franciscan tertiaries, the lay Franciscans who lived here in the 15th century. And their mother house was in Foligno, and the mother house was called Sant'Anna. Besides that, the Madonna del Latte image is often near fountains with water, which is considered miraculous in its abundance for maternal milk. Abundance of water is conducive to the production of milk by a nursing mother, and it's very necessary then for infants. And interestingly, this monastero is built over the site of the Roman baths of Assisi, where spring water was in abundance. Something else, which is of great interest. This is entitled, dedicated to San Quirico, this convent. And San Quirico is the only one that I can think of child martyr of the church. He was martyred in the 1st century AD along with his mother, and he is revered as the patron saint of children. And I wonder, did any of the little Jewish children returning in the evening to their hiding place with their identity cards look up at that and wonder about that? Because they're entering the place dedicated to the patron saint of children. Here are the Clarisse, the Poor Clares in a 1953 photo, and this in the center is the Mother Superior. And let's look at her right here. Madre Giuseppa Beviglia. She lived to a ripe age, as you can see. This is a photo of her in 1984 behind the grill, very severe cloister here. She was recognized as righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem, Israel, in 2013. Assisi has 7 righteous Gentiles. Donaldo, the bishop, this nun, and also another sister who was head of another convent, the Stigmatine Convent, and the printers, and Father Nikachi. Interestingly, San Quirico has underground passages. Sotterranei is the Italian word for the underground passages. And the refugees could enter these underground passages from the dining hall, from the cloister area. And down in these passages, a lot of their documents and their treasures were hidden. Not only that, they could enter the passage from the dining area, the dormitory areas, and come right out into the beautiful garden of the sisters, the cloister. And this is one of the Poor Clares here, looking out over the valley. And this is the largest valley in Umbria, the Valle Umbra Nord. And isn't it lovely to think that these Jewish refugees hidden in Assisi for this year could spend some time and the children could play in lovely gardens like this. These are the gardens of the sisters of the Monastery di San Quirico. I have never seen them, of course, because this is a cloistered convent. And, you know, external people don't enter. People from outside don't enter. This is the sisters' space. Look at the view up there of our marvelous fortress of the 14th century. And this is a group of the Clarisse of San Quirico today. This elderly sister in the middle sitting in a wheelchair. I wouldn't be surprised if she was in that convent perhaps during World War II, when Jewish refugees were hidden there too. On Good Friday every year, the Church of the Poor Clares is open to us, because the dead Christ statue will be carried from the Cathedral of San Ruffino through Assisi to the Basilica of St. Francis, where it will lay in state all day. And then it's carried at night back to the Cathedral of San Ruffino. And here, the Poor Clares are waiting for the arrival of the dead Christ. And the statue is being brought into the convent. The Assisi people are on the outside. I went early in the morning and sat right inside the convent and just waited so I could take these photos. And the sisters would come up to the Christ, kiss his feet, put flowers on the statue, and then the statue would be lifted up and carried out of the Monastery of San Quirico, and then down the street to another convent, a very severe cloister, the Monastery di Santa Coletta, which was built in 1905. And this was founded by a group of sisters from France. And they came to Assisi because at that time, it seemed that there was going to be secularization of religious orders in France. And they came to Assisi, where they established this convent. Jewish refugees were hidden here in the Monastery di Santa Coletta. These are French-speaking Poor Clares. And this sister is waiting for the arrival of the Christ statue. And there are the sisters inside awaiting for the arrival of Christ. And then the Christ is carried out of that convent, and it's soon going to be in the Basilica of San Francesco. And I'll be talking about the Dead Christ procession. I'm going to do a lecture around Christmas on Easter traditions in Umbria. And the Dead Christ procession is really very interesting. Just a word on the Colettini. Donaldo told me this, a Belgian family was hidden there. Their name was Finzi. Belgian Jewish family. They had a little girl, and she would play in the kitchen with the cloistered sisters. I'm sure those cloistered sisters were probably delighted to have a little girl around. And a little baby Finzi was born during their year of hiding. A little child was born in this convent and in another convent, that of the German sisters, where these three young ladies stayed, Mira, Hella, and Leah Baruch. They were from Fiume, northern Italy, which now is part of Croatia. And they were hidden in this convent, the Monastery di Santa Croce. And the sisters here are Clarisse Cappuccini. I'll show you a picture of them in a minute. Look at this delightful garden they have. So the refugees hidden here in this convent could get fresh air. Children could play out here in this garden here. The girls stayed here until they had false documents. Once their family had their false identity documents and they become Bartoli, or Bartoli, I think, And they are from the city of Campobasso, southern Italy, the Molise area. Then they could move to a little apartment attached to another convent, and they stayed in the rental apartment till the liberation of Assisi, June 17th, 1944. While they were hidden there, another little baby was born, son of another couple staying there. And Leah wrote some beautiful memories of her stay at the sisters' convent and staying with the German sisters. First, I want to show you the German sisters. Here they are today. And the sisters staying there are all from German-speaking countries, Germany, Austria, and Alto Adige in northern Italy, where their primary language is German, as well as Italian, I think equally both. And Leah Baruch has a memory of this photo by Pepe Mericio, is probably from about 1970. She said she has happy memories of the kitchen in the morning, where the sister who took care of them, Sister Fidele, would make a delicious hot bread, milk soup in the morning. And she said, I'll always remember it. And she said that her older sister, Mira, studied Latin with Donaldo Brunachi. So once they had false identity documents, she could go out and she'd go to the home of Donaldo Brunachi. He wasn't at Casa Papa Giovanni then, in Via San Francesco, for her Latin tutoring with him. And now the Basilica of Santa Chiara. The sisters were not hiding Jewish refugees here. The Poor Clares. Jewish refugees were generally not hidden in the monastery of the Basilica of St. Francis, because it was thought that there could be serious retaliation on the part of the German troops, that is, destruction of these significant monuments if suspicious individuals were found in them. This is the Basilica of St. Clare, where the Poor Clares live in this section. You can see this has flying buttresses added to the basilica in the mid-13th century. And in this section, the buttresses have been filled in and the Poor Clares live here. Not far from this magnificent Basilica di Santa Chiara, built in the beautiful pink and white limestone of Assisi, is the print shop. And the print shop would be, let's just say I could be coming out of the door of the print shop where all the documents are falsified, and this is the view that I would have. So in this print shop, Luigi Brizzi, who died in 1969, and his son Trento, who lived some years longer. I don't remember the date of his death, but we'll see it shortly in another bit of information I want to share. They falsified the ID documents which hid the Jewish refugees. Trento Brizzi rode by bicycle at night to the city of Foligno, which is 20 kilometers from Assisi, to get the engraved stamps that would be put on top of the identity documents. So first they'd make the ID documents, then they had to be stamped with the stamp of the city from which they were supposed to be coming. That is, for the Viterbis, it had to be the city of Lecce. For the Baruchs, who become Bartali, it had to be the city of Campobasso. And that was done by an expert engraver who was in Foligno. The Brizzis were printers. This expert engraver did these, and these photos were given to me by Trento Brizzi's nephew's son. Absolutely extraordinary. They sent me these this week, and I was absolutely astounded. What do we have here? This is the fascio littorio. This is the fascist symbol, everybody. This dates from an ancient Roman symbol, the littorio, bound sticks with an axe, with a royal eagle. So fascist symbol, symbol of the city of Assisi, symbol of the city of Assisi, and this, printed by Brizzi in Assisi. Now, he also sent me this photo. These are more of the engraved stamps. Here we have the fascio. These, I presume, are stamps from the cities of Lecce, Campobasso, and the other cities from which the Jewish refugees were said to be from. So again, let me repeat, they could not any longer be from any city north of Rome. Please realize that the Allies had liberated southern Italy. So their provenance had to be from a town of southern Italy, so that the place from which they were coming could not be traced by German police or fascist police. They all had to come from south of Rome. And this is Brizzi, and he received the award from the Graphic Printers Association of America. And he received this award in the United States some years ago. And then later, gentlemen from the same association came to Assisi, and he was extremely proud to show them all the printing equipment. He was in the United States in 1984. And on that trip, Donaldo accompanied him, as well as the mayor at that time of the city of Assisi, who was Edo Romoli. And he was honored with their Freedom of the Press Award, which is an award for demonstrating commitment to a free and uncensored press and to the basic human rights of all people. Presenting the award was Henry Waldman, again, who later came to Assisi and visited him in Assisi. You know, all of these people, Trento Brizzi, Donaldo, why did you do it? We did it because it was our job to do it. Trento Brizzi's nephew, Mr. Shamana, I asked him, did your uncle ever talk about what was done? And he said, no, there was not much talk at all. They knew it was better not to speak, to not put in danger the family. But they also basically felt that they were simply doing their job. So very little discussion at all was done about heroism or any such thing. And they just also felt that silence was simply better in these situations. This is the plaque of Yad Vashem recognizing 1997, Luigi and Trento Brizzi for what they did for the Jewish refugees. This is the plaque at Yad Vashem, and you can see their names right here. And this is the plaque which is over the door of the shop. They've put it back up. It was taken down for some time because they were in this shop, which would be right below this door, until 2010. But as of 2010, they had to give up the shop. It was taken back by the people who owned it, and they briefly went to another area of Assisi, had a shop for a few years, and now, of course, they're deceased, and they worked many, many years, but they've both since died. This says, in this locale from 1943 to 1944, in this small print shop, artisanal print shop, Luigi and Trento Brizzi, father and son, printed for the Jews, welcomed in Assisi, documents that hid their true identity. This was put up by the city of Assisi in 1996. And then in 2010, they must move to another locale. And this is Ugo Shamana, nephew of Trento Brizzi, moving out the huge printing press, which is now in the Museum of Memory. I recently was in the cemetery of Assisi looking for their graves. I had some indication from relatives and was able to find the grave. And it was very beautiful for me to see that fresh flowers had recently been left by someone who'd visited. And it says, here are resting Luigi and Trento Brizzi, father and son, who in the dramatic years of 1943 to 1944, at risk of their own lives in their small print shop, printed the documents to save numerous Jewish refugees hidden in Assisi, 1943 to 1944. And there they are. Luigi Brizzi died in 1969, Trento Brizzi in 1992. Father and son, with always smoking his pipe and this very tranquil face. And, you know, Trento had said one time, printing is what is the job we do. and it was needed by other people, and we simply did our job. This is the printing press, and it's now in the museum. This section of the museum is dedicated to Colonel Valentin Mueller, and this is dedicated to the Brizzis. This is Ugo Sciamanna, who is the nephew of Trento Brizzi with a cousin, and they're reading the exhibit here. This is a school group recently in the Museum of Memory of Assisi on a school trip. You can see they're all taking notes. The person guiding them through is explaining the print shop, and these are all the drawers with a different typeset of the Brizzis used in their print shop. And there's another room in the museum dedicated to Gino Bartali. I always pronounce it wrong. My daughter Julia, if she's listening, will be laughing at me. Did you know, everybody, that the 101st edition of the Giro d'Italia, the Italy Grand Bicycle Tour, one of Italy's greatest cycling races, started in Jerusalem in 2018, not in northern Italy? There were 2 additional stages in Israel, and after a rest day, the cyclists headed to Italy for 18 further stages, the race ending in Rome on May 27th. And they did that year. They launched the race in Israel to pay tribute to the Italian cyclist Gino Bartali, a 3-time winner of the Giro d'Italia, who had helped rescue hundreds of Italian Jews during World War II. He won the Giro d'Italia in 1936. He won it in 1937. He won the Tour de France in 1938, the Giro again in 1948, and the Tour de France in 1946. An extraordinary cyclist that the locals called with the nickname Ginetaccio, for his extraordinary and legendary cycling conquests on the Alps and the Pyrenees. His greatest conquest, however, not first place in a cycle race, but successful efforts to assist the Bishop of Florence in saving hundreds of Jews, about 800, it's thought, during World War II, at risk of his own life and that of all his family. How did he do it? The documents were put in his handlebars and in the bike frame. And as he was a cyclist, he had an excuse to be out training. And one time near Florence in the early morning, he was stopped by some soldiers, and they simply wanted his autograph. At another point, at a checkpoint, the guards started talking to him about cycling, but then decided, well, as long as you're here, we better check your bike. And he said, per favore, non lo toccare. Please, please don't touch it. Don't take it apart. It's all set up for my next race. It's perfectly balanced, and I have to ride soon the Giro d'Italia. So they let him go. And by coincidence, not only did he hide documents in his bike handle and frame, he was asked to hide a Jewish family, actually friends of his. I think their name was Goldenberg, and he hid them in the family cellar, also in Florence. On that May 18th, May in 2018, pardon me, it was May 16th, the cyclists have come into Assisi, and they're about to leave, and they're headed for the Marches region. Let's see, let me just move this here a bit. There you can see the Basilica of St. Mary of the Angels, and they're going to be headed to the Marches region, Osimo. This is the next lap of their trip. And there's the mayor of Assisi, via, off you go with the flag down. And I have this photo just to show you. This is Bartali. He always wore his racing jersey emblazoned with his name when he trained, hopefully therefore so that, you know, questions wouldn't be asked and so forth. And on that May Day in 2018, his daughters, Gioia, right here, and Stella, We're at the Museo della Memoria, the Museum of Memory, with Mauro Vegni, who's the director of the Giro d'Italia. And they were here for a special occasion. Gioia had said, my sister and I decided that my father's cappellina, excuse me, not my father, grandfather, it was their grandfather. My grandfather's cappellina, or small chapel, should belong here in the Museum of Memory. Their father actually was his only son, or one of his sons, Andrea. And you see this little chapel here? Gino Bartali's cappellina is now in the Museum of Memory. He was very devoted to St. Teresa of Lisieux, and he became a Carmelite tertiary. He's a big fan of the Carmelites. They were big fans of Gino Bartali, and there we have them asking for his autograph. And here he is with some Carmelites, and here he is with his son, Andrea. And his son, Andrea, proudly pointing to his father's name at Yad Vashem in 2013. And the granddaughters decided that that chapel should go to the Museum of Memory in Assisi. And they said it was such an important, in Assisi happened, an extremely important operation for the salvation of the Jews during the years of racial persecution in which my grandfather had participated. And the Mass was celebrated in that small chapel. The last time a Mass was celebrated in that chapel was on May 5th, 2000, the day of the death of Gino Bartali. And just this, I'd like to mention this. This is a quote from his son at Yad Vashem, or certainly after. And he was asked if his father ever talked, why he did it, and so forth. And he's quoted his father. He said, my father would have said these words, but this is Andrea Bartali saying these words, which he said he would like to quote his own father. I am a cyclist, a lover of sports. The others are heroes, those who have suffered. I only made available the skills that I have. I don't want to be a hero. Why? For riding a bike? Riding a bike was my job. I put my job at the service of others in need. And recently I talked to Gioia Bartali on the phone, and she said this to me, one of her memories of her grandfather. They'd been riding in the car one day, and her grandfather, chatting idly, said suddenly to her, you know, people will talk more about me after I am gone. I asked Gioia what she thought he meant, and she replied, I think that he was suddenly fully conscious of all that he had done, all that he had accomplished. This is the little chapel in the Museo della Memoria, the Cappellina di Gino Bartali. And we certainly cannot conclude our discussion without mentioning Colonel Valentin Mueller, medical doctor, commander of the German troops of the Wehrmacht in Assisi in World War I, actually in 1943. He came to Assisi. He wanted to come because he had heard that a medical hospital was opening here for the German wounded, and he wanted to be involved in that hospital. As mentioned, was a devout Catholic, went to Mass daily at the tomb of St. Francis. He was staying at the Hotel Windsor Savoy, which would be right here to the right. This is an old photo, and he would have walked out here, up this road, past the Hotel Subasio on the other side. It was then the pension Subasio. And this is where the German military stayed. He wanted to stay in a smaller hotel near there. And he made available to anybody in Assisi who needed it his phone number, which was 210. And we all know that. It's still the phone number of the Hotel Windsor Savoia, 075-812-10. 801-210. It's still the phone number. And the Assisani were extremely attached to him because they realized that it was due to Colonel Valentin Mueller that their city was saved for bombing by the Allies. He was very aware of the dangers threatening that Basilica of St. Francis built over the tomb of St. Francis. He was aware of damage perhaps to the tomb of St. Clare and her basilica, the Church of San Damiano. And after all, in 1944, Allied bombers were devastating towns where it's thought that the Germans were, such as Monte Cassino in southern Italy. He, as well as Padre Custode, who was the Father General of the Franciscans, Bede Hess, he was the first native-born American to be Father General of the order in the Basilica, had repeatedly pleaded with the Holy See to intervene for Assisi with the Allies. While Assisi's mayor, Arnaldo Fortini, intervened with the fascist government, all hoping to save Assisi. But they were aware that Assisi's security could be ensured only if the town were declared città ospedaliera, hospital city. That is, the only Germans present could be the wounded and the medical personnel. Military personnel would have to stay outside. This was a great desire of Colonel Valentin Mueller, and he often met with Bishop Niccolini and always mentioned it to them when they met. He was invited even to Niccolini's birthday dinner at the bishop's palace one night. And he realized the importance of this. He sought and obtained permission from the General Kesselring to turn Assisi into a field hospital to treat German war casualties, but 3 hospitals were needed. One was the Istituto Serafico. And it was a German military hospital then to care for German wounded. It is an institute for the severely handicapped. It has been, I believe, since 1947 when it was restored. It was first built in 1871. The second hospital was the Convitto Nazionale Principe di Napoli, a building built in the mid-19th century. This is a school. It still is. It is where 2 of our children went to high school. There's a middle school there. There's an elementary school. And at one time, the Convitto was a place where children of orphans and so forth could go to school and also board. This becomes the second German medical hospital in Assisi. This is a photo from those years. The third one was due to the initiative of the Bishop Niccolini. He gave the Seminario of Assisi, the seminary built in the early 20th century, to the bishop as the third German military hospital. He did not even ask the Holy See, which he should have done, but he knew it was essential to save the city of Assisi by making sure that the Germans had their 3 military hospitals. And they did, and that's basically what saved Assisi. This is the Serafico today, the Institute for Severely Handicapped. And right on the right, at the roundabout, as you enter Assisi, you'd go right up to the Basilica here, is the monument to Colonel Valentin Mueller. For God and for friends. This is the Day of Liberation in Assisi, June 17th, 1944. The British enter Assisi. They're coming into the main square, and they found the city intact. The day before, June 16th, 1944, Colonel Mueller had left the area. Most of the other German soldiers had left by the 15th. He met with some SS troops in the valley below Santa Maria degli Angeli, below Assisi. He had barriers put up so they couldn't approach Assisi. There were heated words exchanged. He said, I'm making it very clear that nothing should be touched in that city. And he waited until they moved on, and he finally left the city on June 16th, wanting to be very, very sure that no stone would be touched on the city of his beloved, of any of the buildings of his beloved Assisi. Here's Colonel Valentin Mueller. As the plaque on the wall just outside the city of Assisi confirms, The Colonel Mueller, medical doctor, protected the city of Assisi and all the people entrusted to him. And there was a saying in Assisi for many years. You can still hear it if you ask the elderly people what they used to say in World War II. They would say, Assisi ha tre protettori, Dio, San Francesco, e Colonnello Mueller. Assisi has three protectors, God, St. Francis, and Colonel Valentin Mueller. I'd like to close extending thanks to Colonel Valentin Mueller, Bishop Placido Nicolini, Donaldo Brunachi, the cloistered sisters who hid so many Jewish refugees, the Franciscan, Father Nikachi, and others in his community. We owe them so much for having saved Jewish refugees in the medieval splendor of the city of Assisi. Come visit us soon. Francis would say Pax et Bonum. It means the same as Shalom.